Now, much of the discussion around the purportedly better treatment of Jews by Muslims centers around an actually better period known as the Golden Age of Jewish life in Islamic Spain. It lasted from roughly the 10th through the 11th centuries. Places very prominent, many of you have visited and told me about your trips there, Cordova, Granada, Toledo, etc. And Jewish flourishing included participating in philosophical discussions, learning about medicine together with Muslims mostly, but even Christians sometimes, poetry that they shared, and poetic formats and so forth, biblical scholarship. And there were even times when these moderate Muslims allowed Jews to serve in the government and even in the military. But all of this within demi limits. It was also short-lived. In the 12th century, there arrived from North Africa a group of much more radical Muslims who basically beat the other ones to death anyway and took over the Iberian Peninsula and really demanded religious uniformity. It was not good for the Muslims who were living there. They abolished dhimmi status, so we didn't even have that protection anymore, and they engaged in forced conversion of both Jews and Christians who found themselves under this rule because, remember, the Christians were fighting a war with the Muslims. Well, the Christians ultimately won, but it would take another couple hundred years when in the 1400s, late 1400s, we have the Reconquista, and the Spaniards now take over. The Christian Catholic Spaniards now take over. We have documentation, and a lot of it, of both persecution and massacres of Jews in Morocco, in Algeria, in Libya, and Spain. We have documentation of humiliation policies where suspected crypto-Jews, secret Jews, were forced to wear degrading clothing. In other words, you converted to Islam, but we're suspicious of you, so we're going to keep an eye on you, and the way to do that is they force you into degrading clothing, the headwear, etc. Jewish life was, by these people, altogether destroyed. Synagogues dismantled, Jewish public practice outlawed. As the Jews would do in later 15th century Christian Spain, same place, new people, new rulers, they did submit to insincere conversion. We don't know how many of them, but we know it happened. It is quite possible that one of our greatest rabbis of all time, Maimonides, who lived from 1138 to 1204, so it was during this transition into this new, stricter rule in the Iberian Peninsula, that he may have actually converted to Islam. It's easy, by the way, you just have to say some words. And that ultimately, when he escaped, went to Egypt, first to Israel, then to Egypt, he was able to become a free Jew again, because Egypt was not like this. In fact, he became the physician to the king there, the caliph there. He wrote, based on the Talmud, a very important decision, because many people, and certainly later during the Christian times, Jews were wondering, I converted insincerely. Now I'm living in Amsterdam. Now I'm living in South America. Now I'm living in Italy, or very, very prominently in Turkey, or you name it. Well, what does that mean? Do I have to reconvert? Well, the Talmud said no. Once you're a Jew, you're a Jew. And he said the same thing. He wrote a long responsum, a Jewish law, a Jewish legal responsum, saying basically this: Yehudi afal pi shechata Yehudi. A Jew, even if he sins by compulsion, is always a Jew. And the process of teshuvah, of return, of repentance, was nil for people who were forced to. Anyway, the period of the Almohads, as they were called, these folks that I've been speaking about, is a clear counterexample of this romanticized idea that all was glorious and wonderful under Islam, while only Christianity was mean to the Jews. Not true at all. Other lands would also see many outbreaks of violence and restrictions, from Baghdad to Yemen, even Persia. And to sum it up, let's just basically say neither system produced equality. Both created vulnerability, but through different logic systems. And while Jewish life did flourish under certain types of Muslim rule for short times, it was even then conditional, not principled. And their safety, of course, always, as it did in Christendom, depend upon who was in charge. All right, this is going to take us now to Christian Spain. So as I hope you know, this is basic human history, world history. Christianity did take over the Iberian Peninsula under the joint monarchy of, and they never taught me that when I was learning about Columbus sailing the ocean blue, but Ferdinand and Isabella. No lovers of the Jews, let's just say this. This was a hinge moment, because for the very first time, we see here a fusion of ideology. The type of anti-Judaic, in other words, hostile to religious beliefs of the Jews, anti-Semitic, well, let me say Jew hatred so I don't confuse you. Jew hatred, and we begin to see something that looks racialized and ethnicized. A something that is created by the suspicion that a lot of these Jews, they're not converting so sincerely. Now, why did so many Jews convert? Because they didn't have a choice. There was a decree of expulsion that was issued in 1492 by the monarchy. It took place on the 9th of Av, which is our day of universal mourning. I spoke about that with regard to the Crusades last week, how they would certainly, at certain times, would focus their hostility and their murderous intent upon Jews on that horrible, horrible, sad day, which, of course, remembers the first and second destructions of the temple and so forth. But it was very difficult for people to leave. Many did, but a lot of people couldn't leave right away. It's not so easy. You know, it's not like they could book a flight out of Lisbon or something. Between Spain and worse in Portugal, and we did probably 2 sessions on this in the class I taught about it, the Jews were really suffering. Now, with the Reconquista, they're suffering even more. And they are seen by the monarchy, by the church, which is really behind this, by the office of the Inquisitor, to be insincere converts, suspected even without evidence. Anything that could possibly be brought against them would be. We call these people conversos. Many Jews, not liking them so much and not realizing the pressures they were under, called them moranos, which meant pig. And today we also call them crypto-Jews. And there are many of their descendants running around the world. There are people that I met in Miami who came from South America who had memories of Jewish great-grandparents who were secret Jews from their parents and their parents and their parents. A story I heard about a woman in Spain that a rabbi friend of mine met, this is an old story now, met in the 1950s, and the grandmother would go down in the basement every week and light candles. She didn't even remember why anymore, but she would light candles. Many, however, of these Jews got out. The ones who didn't, though, under constant suspicion, known as conversos or cristianos nuevos, new Christians, created a problem for Christian society, which is the question, how do we know they're really Christian? And this is who the Spanish Inquisition was largely leveled against. Forget the image of Mel Brooks's The Inquisition business that he did in the history of the world, where there's a bunch of Hasidic Jews who don't exist yet in the 1400s or 1500s, being tortured because they want to be Jewish. These were people who were reported on by their neighbors, who were simply suspected of insincerity, and who were, in many cases, feared for their Judaizing influence. But the way they spoke about it is why I call this a fusion. The idea that they brought to bear was, in Spanish, known as limpieza de sangre, the purity of blood. The Jews were considered, whether or not they had converted, whether or not they had done so sincerely, to be of impure blood. Why was this necessary? In order to distinguish the old, trustworthy Christians from the new ones who automatically raised suspicion on the very basis of their ancestry. This is why we say racialized or ethnicized bases of hate. Keep in mind, and I'm introducing a little side thought here, Ideas of race and ethnicity are contemporary ideas. The Jews have a different idea of who we are, but I'll get to that in a little while. We have a lot of time restrictions tonight, and I want to tell you a lot of things, but we have to move ahead. If you're interested, there's some guy, doesn't look as much like me as I used to, but he's teaching it, and the whole class is right there online, so you can find it on our page. The Reformation brought about a lot of changes in Europe, but not all of those changes helped the Jews. Martin Luther famously, not Martin Luther King, by the way, okay, the Martin Luther, the German reformer, you know, with the guy who put the things on the church, right? He was very kind to the Jews at first, until he realized these folks ain't converting. And then he became pretty hostile. He was among the most hostile. Now, the Reformation took place primarily where? In Central and Western Europe. This was not an Eastern European phenomenon. And where do most of the Jews live by the 1500s when this breaks out? They live in Eastern Europe. They live under Orthodox Christianity and, depending on where you live there, a Catholicism that is unyielding and that will not give in to any kind of Protestant thoughts. But lest we think that the Protestant Reformation brought peace and harmony to the Jews, well, if it didn't bring it to the Christians, it sure as hell wasn't going to bring it to the Jews. Because as you probably, I hope, know, they were fighting about this for a really long time in some of the bloodiest wars that have ever been fought in the history of humanity, really. Now, how did the Jews, where they primarily lived, get along? Well, they were, as I have spoken about last week, at the mercy of the Christian rulers. They were in many ways necessary, as I spoke about, but they also had intercessors like the court Jews, people who had some money, some prestige in the Jewish world, or that the Gentiles granted it to them. And this helped the Jews a little bit. There was a bit of a golden age there too. Natan taught a couple of classes about the golden age in Poland, and we don't have time to talk about that tonight. But this is a very rich history, but I don't want anybody to think it was a very happy time. Happier times are on the way, but not entirely, and not as much as we make of it sometimes. The Enlightenment comes along. And when I tell you this is a fast trip through the history of Jewish persecution, this is a very fast trip. The Enlightenment, of course, is part of our humanistic legacy, part of the entire Western world's legacy. When we talk about Western European civilization, we are really speaking about the Enlightenment and about the effect it had on peoples who sought freedom and individualism and fairness and so forth, reason, emancipation, equality. But guess what? Even that did not give us everything, certainly not all at once, because we again posed a problem. Because if citizenship is now to be considered universal, and we're going to let the Jews be citizens, the few Jews who actually live in any of these places, like France, where this is happening, because remember, they got thrown out several hundred years earlier of England, France, and many places. Well, if they're going to grant them citizenship, well, how are we to account for their necessity or their compulsion to claim that they are a people, an am, best translated as nation, but it doesn't mean nation? Why do they resist full assimilation, they asked. And so Jew hatred adapted again. And we begin to hear a phrase that I know you're familiar with, the Jewish question. Does this ring a bell? Because this is the clear nationalist, modernist question of what to do with the Jew. By the 18th and 19th centuries, hostility to Jews is simply a policy question. We're now a demographic concern, a social anomaly. It's not theological now, it's political. But there is still plenty of hatred for the Jews that continues. Even as some in the Enlightenment begin to say, well, we'll accept them as individuals, but not as a group, not as a people. And anyway, a lot of the radical Enlighteners weren't that hot on religion anyway by the end of this period. In the late 19th century, this kind of Jew hatred, particularly in Germany, where most of the Jews who were left in Central Europe were living, began to take on a life of its own. The term antisemitism comes to us from this period. It was never known before. It was invented by a Jew-hating journalist in the 1870s whose name was Wilhelm Marr. Wilhelm Marr had a goal of disguising what was known in German in much more plain language, which I use here. Judenhass, Jew hatred. It's much more descriptive. But he wanted to launder this idea, to write it for later generations. And what kind of Jew hatred was he talking about? It was the racialized, ethnicized form. Because as we all know, this was an obsession of many nationalist Germans. You might have heard about that little war we fought with them, right? And all the Jews who died. They created out of Semitism a fabricated racial category. Now, race is a sociological category. And I'm not saying it's not real. It's become real because it's how we divide people up. But Jews have never been one race, but we were characterized that way in Europe. And while we had horrible, almost racialized depictions of us, I'm pointing at the screen because I showed them last week, with the hook noses and that kind of thing, the truth is they made us wear distinct clothing. And at the culmination of this, a distinct badge, because the culmination, I hope you know by now, was the German Holocaust of the Jews, the European death machine of the Jews. We know we didn't all look alike. And we didn't look that dissimilar from them. So why did they create this? Well, to modernize Jew hatred, to cloak it in pseudoscience. That's one of the reasons the Nazis went on to love it, because it framed us as biologically distinct. And that's where we have the bridge from Spain to the Holocaust. The limpieza de sangre, the purity of blood, is a racialized form, an ethnicized form, an ancestor-based form of Jew hatred. And that is happening, of course, here. And you know the Germans laid it out, pseudoscientifically. They wouldn't have said the pseudo part. By characterizing who is a Jew. How much blood do you have to be a Jew? How many grandparents does it take for you to not be one anymore? And so forth and so on. In this age of nationalism, this is a perfect way to separate Jews out, to use every kind of accusation against us that was made before, and to add on to them. Dual loyalty, you got it. Financial manipulation, there it is. Cultural subversion, absolutely. And all of the other evils that we supposedly bring into the world, which are now on the table every single day of social media, the minds of particularly our young people in the United States, and billions of people on this planet. We'll talk about that in a moment. You don't have to believe anything about God. You don't have to have any special attachment to Judaism. You can't convert away from it. This was the German contribution. One of the most influential documents of this period actually predates Nazi Germany, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, first published in Russia in 1903. It was a complete falsehood, proclaiming to be, or purporting to be, the minutes of the meetings of the Elders of Zion, us, Jews, our elders sitting together, planning the destruction of the world. It was a forgery produced by agents of the Tsarist secret police, but the power of it didn't lie in its authenticity. It lay in how perfectly it fit the conspiratorial imagination of the time, and it's never gone out of print. And it is very, very much present in the anti-Jewish world. It is a bestseller to this day in Arab Muslim countries. Iran, everywhere. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, proclaimed that Jews secretly manipulated financial markets, controlled the press, undermined governments, engineered revolutions, planned global rule, did it through capitalism, did it through socialism, did it through all forms of evil. All the old conspiracies were wrapped up in one big bow in this document. It was quickly exposed as fraudulent, but it didn't matter. Conspiracy theories, as I hope you know, are not really reliant on evidence. The protocols would become the most widely distributed anti-Semitic text in modern history. They became the basis for the Dearborn Independent and Henry Ford's spread of Jew hatred. That was where the American community first encountered it, was in those newspapers, the Dearborn Independent, that were placed in all of his distributorships and dealerships. Nazi ideology picks up on this, views Jews as racial contagion, as an existential threat, all of the things that are in the protocols, and for the first time amongst themselves and then before the eyes of the entire world, said the only way to solve this problem is to eliminate the Jew, to completely do away with us. This, by the way, is what the word genocide was invented for. Not for casualties of war, for people who were rounded up and systematically slaughtered, 6 million of them. We have not yet recovered our numbers. At the time that all of this was happening, we find ourselves in the world, or close to the world in which we're living. Because the question remains, how does this become part of a conflict between Arabs and Jews that leads to where we are here today? Well, first of all, it's not just Arabs, it's Muslims, and certain kinds of Muslims who have taken power and seek to absolutely propagandize and in every way bring their children into the hatred of Jews. During the British Mandate, which is known as the time that the British, on behalf of the League of Nations, took control following World War I of the land of Israel and modern-day Jordan. They called it the British Mandate Palestine. It's the first time that Palestine was ever used as a word for a polity. Recall that last week I mentioned that the word Palestine, the name Palestine, was created by the Romans in the 130 CE, after the last of the wars that they fought against the Jews, the one that may have destroyed the entire Jewish population with a small exception of those who stayed, mostly fled to the north of Israel, that was conducted by them. And in order to make Israel, Judea, Judenrein, they implemented a raft of decrees that included changing its name. Arabs arrived there later. They arrived there later through the Arab conquest. I'm not going to talk about all of that tonight, but that is not difficult for you to find. This movement of the Jews, Zionism, meant one thing and one thing only, that the Jews wanted a place of their own. It wasn't even a state when it was first articulated. It took some time before a state became something that they could realistically imagine. It wasn't all of the land. It was whatever the hell they could get their hands on. They didn't steal anybody's land. They bought land from the Ottoman landlords, many of whom were not local in the land, but they bought that land, and they bought it in the worst places. They bought it in, if you remember what the map looked like in 1947 that was proposed and unfortunately never carried through because of the war that happened in 1948. It was in all the malaria-filled areas. That really tracks the basis of where the Jews bought the land. This invasion that many of the Arabs, the Muslim Arabs felt was coming, was a top-down issue. In fact, and this is no secret, Many of the descendants today of Palestinians, many of those people moved there in the 1920s because the Jews were creating a good economy there. Go read Innocents Abroad. You don't have to read the whole book. You know who wrote it? Mark Twain. He went on a trip around the world, and he went to Israel and went to Syria. He'll tell you what it looked like. And he didn't have a dog in this game. He's dead now. But he'll tell you what it looked like, and it's an accurate description. The Jews were bringing some prosperity, and by the 1920s, more and more. This was considered a religious threat to Islam, because Islam cannot give back or cannot share a territory once it's conquered, unless it's taken from them by force, and then it becomes their goal forever to take it back. And I'm not making this up. They write about it all the time. They say this all the time. This is why Iran is the way it is. This is why the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, you name it. This is why they're the way they are. This was institutionalized in the land of Israel by a man that I don't think you know of, a man named Haj Amin al-Husseini. He was the father of the ongoing wars that are fought to this day, an Arab nationalist and an Islamic religious leader. He was appointed by the British to be the Grand Mufti, the Grand Leader of Jerusalem in 1921. He was from a prominent family, rose to become a leading figure in, believe it or not, Arab opposition to British rule, which probably had something to do with them wanting to put him in power, to make him perhaps a little bit more compliant or what have you. He was a violent opponent of Jewish immigration to Palestine. He organized anti-Zionist political movements. He encouraged violence against Jewish communities, including a very, very famous and horrible revolt that took place there in 1929, in which the community of Hebron, the Jewish community of Hebron, was essentially, well, many of them were murdered and essentially expelled. And by the way, those folks, they weren't even part of the Zionist movement. They'd been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years and always gotten along until Haj Amin al-Husseini brought this up. In 1936 to 1939, the Arabs staged a revolt against the British Mandate Palestine rulers, the British. Arab militias targeted both the British authorities and Jewish civilians, and the British removed him from office. He fled the country, and where do you think he wound up? Nazi Germany. He went to Nazi Germany. In Nazi Germany, he famously met with Adolf Hitler in 1941. He collaborated heavily with the regime. He broadcast Arab propaganda, urging Muslims to support the Axis and to oppose Jews and the Allies. He recruited Muslim units for the Waffen-SS in the Balkans, among those who slaughtered Jews. His aides, and there are pictures, gleefully toured death camps as he encouraged Hitler, who needed no encouragement, let us be sure, or at least congratulated Hitler is probably better to say, but to continue with the elimination of the Jews. He did more than any other to import European-style Jew hatred, the Nazi-style Jew hatred, into this new context of the Near East. Later, now, it will merge with other ideological streams, particularly fundamentalist, jihadi terror culture. Now, there were Jews in this part of the world still living under Islam. It wasn't the kind of one-to-one balance we had at one time when the Ashkenazic world was very small, but the Ashkenazic world had grown a great deal. And so this is considered at that time a much smaller part of the Jewish world. These are the Jews, and I spoke about it in a lecture I gave about the Mizrahim, the Eastern Jews, as we call them now, collectively, of the Middle East and North Africa. Both before and after the creation of Israel, the fruits of this Jew hatred led to new heights of persecution for them. There were pogroms, legal discrimination, confiscation of property, and ultimately expulsion. After the creation of Israel, 850,000 to 950,000 Jews were expelled from countries in which they had lived for longer than Arabs had been there, for longer than Islam had existed. The oldest Jewish communities in the world outside of Israel, which only had a tiny community at this point, the oldest major Jewish communities in the world were in Persia and today's Iraq, Babylon, Baghdad. Baghdad was enormously Jewish. All of these people were forced out. Every one of them were forced out. And it was not a response to Israeli policy. It was collective punishment for the fact that Jews wanted anything to do with our ancient indigenous home. Folks, if there's nothing you take away from this tonight, understand that we as a people originated somewhere. We come from somewhere. I know we don't do this in our congregation regularly because our services are truncated and we talk about values, but you've all been, most of you have been to a traditional Jewish service at a Reformed temple, a conservative temple, an Orthodox congregation, whatever it is. You know that every other word out of their mouth is Zion and Israel for thousands of years. Nor did all of these attacks on Jews take place after 1948. The Farhud, one of the worst expulsions and persecutions of the Jews in history of the Near East, that took place in 1941 in Baghdad. In the class I taught, we learned about many of the specifics that got us to where we are today, including this vile Jew hatred that came over to our own country. We talk about in that class Henry Ford, as I mentioned. We talk about the Charles Coughlins. We talk about the Charles Lindberghs, the relationship to other kinds of things. But as we get now to what is going to be the last part, and I'm actually more or less on time, I want to remind us that what we've seen here is not a straight line, it's a pattern. Across centuries, these accusations have changed, the language has shifted, the justifications have evolved, but keep in mind that it is always us portrayed as a moral problem, a social contaminant, an existential threat. Doesn't matter how it's done, it's being done. It is happening right this minute on your phones. And you can open up Instagram, Twitter, and you will find it there. And you can wait 5 minutes and you'll find worse. The Jew hatred has adapted. And this anti-Zionism, put through the grinder, by the way, of the Soviet Union, which decided they didn't, like Wilhelm Marr, want to be against the Jews biologically, but they wanted all Jewish culture erased. You know, they even changed the spellings of Yiddish words that looked too Jewish to them. A lot of Yiddish words are Hebrew words that are just pronounced a little differently. They even changed the spellings to de-Judaize. But what they mostly did was turn the Jewish world of their country, those who did not want to participate in their erasure, into Zionists. All of them were Zionists. And I wish I had time to talk about it, but I don't. And it is a whole story in and of itself. And I'm sure that folks you know remember that story. What is actual Zionism? I mentioned it before. We're a people. We're entitled to self-determination. We need it. Takes the form now of a Jewish state. That Jewish state is real. They can call it the Zionist entity all they want. They've decided now the word Zionist in America, they say it's like saying we're supremacists. We're Nazis. Zionists are Nazis, if you hadn't heard. Jews and Zionists, they now believe, hold a single monolithic ideology, which is inherently racist. Now added to that, inherently white settler colonialist. Isn't it interesting how under the Nazis we weren't white, but under these guys we're all only white? Anybody know the percentage of Israelis who are of Middle Eastern and North African extraction? It's about 51, 52%, but it's growing. It's growing because the Russian immigration leveled it off a little bit, but they're intermarrying too now. I know a lot of young people who came to my summer camp who were half Russian and half Iraqi, or half Moroccan and half Russian. In any case, this doesn't really have to do with borders or policies or, oh, I don't like Netanyahu's policy. I dare anybody to tell me what exactly about that policy you don't like. I know what I don't like. It has absolutely nothing to do with what anybody else is talking about. I said last week, Anybody would have conducted this war in exactly the same way. The war was not controversial. How it started was they were mad at him about that. I have counted at least 8 opportunities that the Palestinian Arabs have refused, leading all the way up to just my time here, 2013 and 14. At least 8 times that they could have had a state in Judea and Samaria, and certainly in Gaza. And I was there on the day they left Gaza. And I was there for the debate leading up to it. And how did the Jews celebrate uprooting the settlers, and there weren't that many of them, but uprooting the settlers and watching the graves of their parents dug up so not even a Jewish dead person would be left there? And the Jews celebrated, hoping that it would be a possibility of peace. Not everyone. Plenty didn't. But it was a moment of hope. All right, I got to get through some of my stuff here. But I think probably one of the most iconic images of this bloodthirsty, murderous approach to the Jews comes from the countdown clock in Tehran, in their main square. They had a countdown clock to the destruction of the Jews. And they were about to get a nuclear weapon. So we can do the math. All right, I got to skip ahead quite a bit because I want to talk about what's happening now. And I got a lot of pages here. All of the things that I've been talking about for 2 sessions now, all of these libels, all of these ways of understanding the Jews have now come down to supposedly the conflict. We hear Israel, and subsequently all Jews, because that's the language that's out there now, described as genocidal, described as running an apartheid regime, described as this colonial project, and most importantly, described among the nations of the world as uniquely illegitimate. Uniquely illegitimate. Now, where does this come from now? Well, they're not just the fringe activists who are saying this anymore. It's members of legislatures, the people running the United Nations, where Iran sat prominently on no less than 3 human rights commissions. Wrap your mind around that one. Public intellectuals, university faculty. These words, genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, are being casually bandied about and applied to us. And it's happening now even in our 2 political parties. Gavin Newsom has invoked this. Apartheid recently. Others, prominent others, have talked about genocide repeatedly. Genocide? Apartheid? Have they ever been to Israel? I mentioned last week. There are more free Arab Muslims walking around Tel Aviv alone than there are any Jews in all of the Arab Muslim countries, all 57 of them. I think my count is correct. Not only that, there are 2 million Israeli Muslims, Arabs. 2 million. Are there 2 million Jews in any Arab country, any Muslim country? Is it done perfectly? Is it wonderful? Is there a member of the Supreme Court who comes from that community? Yes. Did he help sentence a president of Israel to prison? Yes. That's called a democracy. And that is not apartheid. It is certainly not, without evidence, the kind of thing that they talk about, genocidal, apartheid, etc. Now come the memes. We've got memes all over social media. Images, slogans, caricatures, conspiracy theories, claims that the Jews run the governments. Whose fault is this war? I'm not going to talk about the war, but whose fault is this war? Arthur was the other day at a discussion group he goes to. I won't say where or who, but people that he gathers with every week. They asked him, I guess because he's a Rebbetzner or something, but probably because he's an outspoken and proud Jew, do you not think that Netanyahu dragged Trump into this war? Really? First of all, do you know Trump? Secondly, it's a little country of 8 million under constant barrage. And this little country that everyone has a new idea about, drag them into the war. I can't think of anything that fits better into what we've been talking about. The Jew that controls the world, the Jew that is the most evil, most hideous on the planet. This is what we're hearing now. And the reason that we are seeing what we are seeing here in our own community is because of this rhetoric. Because it has come to a boiling point, and even more so, it is boiling over. Last week I talked about this. I had some conversations with some of you. How many synagogues have been attacked since I spoke from this lectern last week? How many synagogues? How many do you think? 7. 7. 3 were shot up in Toronto. By the way, at the press conference, the Toronto Star, where they were talking about the 3rd synagogue being shot up, asked this: shouldn't we be concerned about Islamophobia? That was the question. That was the one question posed by the Toronto Star in the wake of 3 synagogues. A synagogue was attacked in Belgium. A synagogue was attacked in Norway. A synagogue was attacked here, and I'm forgetting the latest one, although it might have been Norway. If you can remember it, tell me. And the synagogue here, of course, the 6th or 7th, I think. It's happening everywhere. Rotterdam, thank you. Rotterdam this morning. 7 since I spoke to you last week. And what happened here could have been horrible. And we're going to what? Blame the Jews for this? Because that's what I hear. I don't always pull out my phone during services, but I thought, what the hell? Because, you know, I get all this stuff here. I posted, I didn't post this. Okay, here we go. This is a story from Metro Detroit News. It's just showing what happened yesterday, some behind the scenes with the police and so forth. So I opened up the comments, and what did I find? Okay, let's see. They don't do all that for school shootings. Why are there so many police there? Why? Why do the Jews need so much protection? 500 cops for a single shooter? Only the Jews could ask for that. Can I be a Jew? Here's just an observation. Never saw so many police anywhere. Let's see. Mossad, till proven otherwise. In other words, it's a false flag. Images of the children being let out. AI. Made up. Let's see. What a waste of resources. This is objectively horrible for the Jews to have set this up. Here's one person who said, "Oh my God, so many hateful and disgusting comments on this," and just on and on and on and on and on it went. And I don't even want to read some of these to you. I'm not trying to be biased, but y'all preach peace, and any kid is all right. But the Jews, well, it's different. It's just on and on and on. And this is just one little example. Oh yeah, here's some that say, "Oh, be careful, Israel is listening." False flag. Nobody's going to buy this. It was completely made up. Oh, the Mossad is really pushing this now. They're going to continue to convince you until you're willing to be sent to Iran, using the same stupid method as 9/11, because we did that, in case you didn't hear. Right? You know that. We did that, right? Okay, so what else did I text to myself? All right. Oh, hate crimes in this country. What percentage of the United States are Jews in this country? 2.5%, maybe. What percentage of, well, they call this religion-based hate crimes, but we know that better than that. What percentage of those hate crimes do we comprise? Let me pull up my little guide here, because I'm very bad at remembering numbers. The number is 70%, and this was as of 2 years ago. It has obviously gone up. 2,000 incidents recorded in 2024. the highest number of anti-Jewish hate crimes since the FBI began tracking in 1991, and on and on. I said last week, I'm not a prophet, but I didn't have to be a prophet to know this was coming. And I talked about it almost 3 high holidays ago, and a lot of people came up to me and said, you're catastrophizing, you're hysterical, it's never going to happen here. And then yesterday, everybody's televisions were tuned to it happening here. And it's not the first time it's happened here, it's just the first time it happened that way here. Father Coughlin made it happen too. So did our beloved Henry Ford. And when are they going to take his goddamn name off those hospitals? Why do we accept that as a Jewish community? That this hater has his name. Ford, fine. There was a lot of good people in that family. Huh? We are Henry. Yeah, I really enjoyed it when Dr., let's just say Bernstein or Cohen says, I am Henry. And I want to say, right, the guy with the yarmulke saying it. This brings us to some of the last things I want to say. It's coming from every direction. I talked about horseshoe theory, I think 2.5 years ago for the first time. Some of you heard it, where the extremes come together. It's just one continuous circle tonight. The left, well, Mamdani we know about, although he hides it. His wife's not as good at hiding it. We heard about all the things that she liked and loved on Twitter, or not, I think it was Instagram, because Twitter doesn't tell you anymore, on October 7th. But his wife also provided illustrations for a book, and this was compiled by a woman named Susan Abu Hawa, and I can read some of these tweets to you, but I got to take my glasses off. Let's see. This is by the woman she collaborated with. Jewish supremacist vampires can buy up all the airways. They can manipulate all the algorithms. They can get us canceled from our jobs, but the world will not unsee their evil. She's called us rootless parasites, cockroaches, rabid demons, and other names. And, This is Mamdani's wife. Now, she didn't say these words. She collaborated with a woman who did. And she, of course, liked and celebrated what happened on October 7th. Candace Owens, we have over on the right. And by the way, the left I'm not done with yet. But we have her over on the right. She's the worst. And I'm actually kind of relieved that she's as bad as she is, because I thought she was bad before, too. Bibi wants a third world war so they can hit a global reset. They've done this every time people start noticing what they're about. This is yesterday. It was not a mistake. Israel is required to mass murder children because they worship Baal. Trump does as he is instructed to by Jared Kushner and Bibi Netanyahu. Baal is the false god of the Israelites got in trouble for worshiping. I don't know, this is a new one for me, because I don't remember that particular thing, but she's also said that Chabad is evil, that they're digging tunnels under your houses, etc. But let's not forget that Tucker Carlson also has talked about how Chabad started this war. They're just that influential. Let me tell you what Chabad did yesterday. They run the Friendship Circle. They were there at the Shenandoah Golf Club with our friends in the Chaldean community who know something about what it is to live under Muslim extremist oppression. And together with the Soul Cafe, Chabad, and the Shenandoah Golf Club, they fed the little children who were snuck out the back by frightened parents. I have a preschooler. My children go to a synagogue that looks very much like that temple. It's Orthodox. I picked my grandson up for camp last summer. There were 4 men in heavy armor with guns, friendliest people you could ever imagine, and the scariest sight I ever saw with my children or grandchildren present. We have people like the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, or Uyghur, or whatever the hell his name is. Here's what he wrote, and he's many horrible things. Frequently portrays Israeli actions as uniquely barbaric, and says that anybody saying antisemitism, which of course they use as the word for Jew hatred, which I'm not saying anymore unless it really is that type, He says, Israel has pushed us into an asinine war. Everything that goes wrong is on them. America had absolutely no interest. No matter who we vote for, we get Israel, we get war. I don't think there's any more I want to say tonight. There's a lot of that. I want to end with some hope, because I couldn't do it last week, but I want to end with something else. I just got to get through this wad of paper here. Geez, I worked way too hard on this for all the things I already knew. What are we going to do? Somebody asked me that. Somebody I love asked me that. What are we going to do? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is be empowered Jews. Somebody told me this week, empowered Jews empower Jews. That was my message 2.5 years ago. Be visible. It's okay. History teaches us something else, though. The Jewish response to crisis has never been withdrawal. It has always been for us to recommit to one another and to the Jewish people. I think the answer is for us to double down on Jewish peoplehood. This is, for me, essential. Our movement speaks explicitly about the core of our Jewish identity. It talks about our shared fate, our shared history, our shared destiny. It talks about our peoplehood. These are not abstract ideas. They are the scaffolding of our Jewish community. I find myself allied now with people who politically I was not that interested in before, because they are outspoken Jews or allies. And whether I agree with them or not on other political issues, I appreciate what they're doing. I appreciate that Ben Shapiro tells the Republicans to root this cancer out. I appreciate that Ted Cruz has not flagged for 1 minute in defending the Jews, and it is sincere and it is appreciated. And I have been dismayed that we do not have a Ben Shapiro or a Ted Cruz on the left. And I am waiting for such a person to arise. And I assume one will. So far, it is John Fetterman and John Fetterman alone standing opposed to this. But that's another topic too. These ideas of shared fate, of shared destiny, of peoplehood are not abstract. They are what allow us Jews to have been scattered throughout the continents and throughout history and still think of ourselves as a single people. A world people is what Rabbi Wein used to call us. But he was also a Zionist. And he believed that because of how the world had treated us, a Jewish homeland was essential. I am both of those things. People say frequently to me, and I know I've said this to you before, well, why are you a rabbi if you don't believe in God? And my answer is always exactly the same. I don't believe in God. I believe in the Jewish people. That's what I believe in. I believe in it very deeply. I believe in the extraordinary story of a people that has endured exile, persecution, dispersion, and catastrophe, and yet has created such culture, such an ethical treasury of values and morals that we really do follow, not bow, but our tradition. I believe that humanistic Judaism is very unique in the sense that it places the human story and the Jewish human story at the center of our Jewish identities. It doesn't come from the divinity. It doesn't come from the divine. It doesn't come from supernatural authority. I believe, and it's why I'm here, that the living, evolving experience of the Jewish people is the total sum, all of the content of what it means to be a Jew. And I think this means something very important for how we respond. Because in addition to the values and the other Jewish treasures that we preserve and in our humanistic movement we humanize, our task must be to ground it more deeply in peoplehood. Your generation does that. I want the younger generation to do it as well. I want us to learn how to keep the bond of peoplehood intact. Not us opposed to the world, but us as an individual people in the world. We can be individual humans, can't we? Well, we can be a group that has distinctiveness. If there is not a group on this earth that deserves that, after being here for 3,200 documented years, I can't think of who else should be that. We can do this through education, through conversation, through intellectual honesty, through moral seriousness, but above all, to a value that I don't frequently repeat but have started to say almost every day from the Talmud, Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. Every member of Israel, Jews, Israel here means Jews, every Jew is responsible for one another. It's why so many people are here tonight, and hopefully listening online. It's why the other synagogues are filled up tonight. It's why this community pulled together. It's why this was an attack on all of us, not just Temple Israel. Temple Israel was iconic in many ways, is iconic in many ways, and that's why this particular hater chose it. The name Israel happens to be in it. Well, it's in hundreds, probably thousands of other synagogues too, because we are Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. Jew is a later term. I want to end with a little story about our responsibility. This is from a book I'm reading by Dara Horn called People Love Dead Jews. She wrote this before October 7th. If you don't know who she is, I suggest you find her, Dara Horn, a great novelist, actually, and I am seriously, I admit to the guilt that I have not read her novels, but now having read this book, I will certainly go to explore those. She talks in one of the chapters of this book about how people love dead Jews, not so much the living Jews, about a trip to a place I'd never heard of, Harbin, China. Did you ever hear of it? Okay. Sorry? Oh, you read the book. Anybody not read the book who ever heard of it? This was a town where, for a variety of reasons, a bunch of Jews from Russia went and established a community there. And it was there for like 30 years until the Maoists and all the things happened and they left. And some of them were seriously persecuted as being Westerners and so forth. But they built the whole town. It's one of the coldest places on earth, I'm told. Famous ice festival and so forth. So she went there during the winter and she explored it. They had, at some point in the 90s, found someone who would guide them in reconstructing some of the Judaism that was there and some of the Jewish buildings. Among them was the old synagogue, which, as she calls the guy, the one Jew, the one Harbin Jew, I think she calls this fella. But he's a scholar who lives there part-time and guided this. And I want to read you a little excerpt from the book and what I learned from her. The old synagogue's interior shocked me. I don't know what I was expecting, but what I didn't expect was to be standing in a synagogue no different from every single urban early 20th century synagogue I've entered around the world. From my own former synagogue in New York City to others as far as London and Moscow and Cape Town and Buenos Aires and Melbourne. It's a concert hall now, I should interject. All of those buildings around the world where you walk into the sanctuary, usually after passing an armed guard, could literally be anywhere in the world, which is exactly the point. The one Jew of Harbin, this fellow who was her guide, she just nicknamed him that, did a marvelous job, so marvelous that as I walked into the large hall and saw the massive ark looming before me with its familiar Hebrew, imploring me, Da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand, that when I took my seat in the third row, I could not shut down my muscle memory. She was raised as an observant Jew, and I believe in the conservative movement. This phrase is not over every synagogue ark, but over many. I've seen it in countless places that I've been. Da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand. It comes from the Talmud. And of course it refers to what? God. Of course it refers to God, but does it always? This is what she noticed. My hands went straight to the slot in the seat in front of me, reaching for a prayer book that wasn't there. I almost couldn't stop myself from reciting all the words I've recited in rooms like this. The same words recited by all the people who have gathered in rooms like this over the past 20 centuries. In Yavne, where the Talmud, where the Mishnah came together in Israel. Pumbedita, the Talmudic town in Iraq, Aleppo and Rome and Marrakesh and Philadelphia and Mumbai and Sao Paulo and Harbin, facing Jerusalem. I was awed. And, she concludes, in that moment, I suddenly knew, in a vast sense that expanded far beyond space and time, before whom I stand. I stand with Dara Horn. We all stand with Dara Horn. Dara Horn stands with us, facing 3,200 years of our people. We cannot allow this to die. Every generation of Jews that is here today is here because one of our ancestors, one, made a decision that they were going to remain Jewish no matter what they faced. Know before whom you stand. I stand before my family that came over, like many of yours, to Ellis Island. I stand before my children's grandfather who survived the Holocaust. Who do you stand before? Whoever it is Am Yisrael. Thank you for joining me for this little journey tonight. I'm going to invite Joseph to come forward. We don't have to do it as slowly as we did last week, and instead, maybe just let's do it real fast. Real fast, and let's clap a lot. Because this song, Am Yisrael Chai, Od Avinu Chai, our ancestors live on in us. Od Avinu Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Od Avinu Chai. Od Avinu Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. Everybody up, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. We know exactly before whom we stand. Shabbat Shalom.